Hello, and welcome to the video. Leaked reports suggest that North Korea is close to sending more soldiers to help Russia in the war against Ukraine. Despite already suffering heavy losses, Kim Jong-un seems determined to support Putin, no matter the cost. But Russia isn't the only one receiving help. While Ukraine gets weapons from Western countries, it also has foreign soldiers joining its fight against Russia. These international battalions are making a big impact, and one of the most notable is the Sibir Battalion. Siberia covers 77% of Russia's land and is home to not just Russians, but also various indigenous groups, including the Yakuts, Buryats, Tuvans, and Kalmyks. Siberia has a long history of suffering under Russian rule. In the late 1500s, Russian forces led by Yermak Timofeyevich conquered the region, defeating many indigenous tribes. Later, under Joseph Stalin, Siberia became infamous for its brutal labor camps, known as gulags, where many indigenous people were forced to work in harsh conditions, facing extreme cold, starvation, and violence. Beyond physical oppression, these people also faced cultural repression. The Soviet government tried to erase their traditions and impose Russian culture on them. This left deep scars, and resentment still lingers today. Many young people from these indigenous groups grow up believing they must resist Putin's government because they continue to experience discrimination and harsh living conditions. One example of how the Russian government handles crises was the terrorist attack at Moscow's Crocus Center last year. Over 140 people were killed. Initially, Putin tried to blame Ukraine and the West, but the Islamic State later took responsibility and even released proof. This left the Russian government scrambling, as they had hoped to use the attack as propaganda against Ukraine. After the attack, the Russian government cracked down on Tajik migrants from Central Asia, blaming them for what happened. These migrants usually work low-paying jobs, like collecting garbage. As prejudice against them grew, many were deported. Now, some Russian cities are struggling with trash piling up because there aren't enough workers. Recently, Russia was hit by severe floods due to dam failures in several regions, including the city of Orsk, which was partially underwater. People criticized the government for corruption and poor maintenance, saying that the disasters could have been prevented. Instead of fixing the problem, the government sent priests and helicopters to pray over the affected areas. On top of this, many young Siberians are being sent to fight in Ukraine. They join because they're promised high wages, but most don't survive long enough to see the money. For many of these struggling groups, a Ukrainian victory would mean a chance to break free from Russia's control. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they saw hope for change. But instead of fighting for Russia, they are choosing to fight for Ukraine. They believe that if Ukraine wins, it could weaken Russia's grip on their land, giving them more freedom and control over their own future. That's why, at the end of 2023, the Sibir Battalion, also called the Siberia Battalion, was formed. It's led by Vladislav Amosov, a former Russian intelligence officer, and is made up mostly of ex-Russian soldiers who abandoned the army. There are also regular citizens, many of them young, who have taken up arms as a way to protest against Putin's government. Many of these volunteers have personally experienced political repression or have family members who have suffered under Russia's authoritarian rule. Others are activists and political opponents who see this as a chance to continue their fight against the regime. For most of them, joining Ukraine's side is not just about war, it's about resisting Putin's rule and defending democracy. As mentioned earlier, Siberia has a long history of being marginalized and exploited by the Russian government. That's why, as soon as the Sibir Battalion was formed, more than 60 men immediately signed up. Since then, the battalion has kept growing. It's difficult to know exactly how many members are active today, but some reports estimate around 300. Now, you might be thinking, only 300? That's nothing compared to Russia's massive army? But here's where things get interesting. First, the Sibir Battalion isn't fighting alone. It's actually the third foreign battalion to be formed since the war started. Early on, volunteers from countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Poland came together to create the International Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine. Another group, the Georgian Volunteer Corps, was originally formed in 2014 when Russia took Crimea and grew stronger in 2022. This unit is mainly made up of experienced fighters from Georgia, a country that has also suffered from Russian military aggression. Together, these battalions have been making a real impact in Ukraine's fight. In the case of the Sibir Battalion, they aren't just fighting in the trenches. They've played a key role in strategic attacks. For example, in 2024, they and other Russian dissident groups launched a series of attacks inside Russia, targeting the regions of Belgorod and Kursk. While Ukraine carried out drone strikes on fuel and ammunition depots, Sibir Battalion soldiers sabotaged pipelines to increase the damage. Several oil storage facilities went up in flames, causing major logistical problems for the Russian military. In another operation, they used explosives to destroy ammunition depots, bridges, and tunnels, and attack trains carrying military supplies. This caused serious delays in moving troops and supplies, putting even more pressure on Russia's front lines. The battalion also took part in the Battle of Avdiivka, one of the war's most intense and strategically important fights. Located in eastern Ukraine, Avdiivka saw brutal combat, and the battalion played a key role in defending the city. But their impact goes beyond the battlefield. Their resistance represents something much bigger, a growing anti-Russia movement in the region. Many Siberians feel abandoned and exploited. Siberia is rich in natural resources like oil, gas, coal, precious metals, and timber, which contribute massively to Russia's economy. But instead of benefiting the region, most of the profits go straight to Moscow, while Siberia remains underdeveloped and neglected. On top of that, Chinese companies have been given access to Siberia's resources, making locals even more frustrated. Many believe Putin is prioritizing China's interests over his own people. Worse, the government treats them as second-class citizens or even as cannon fodder for its wars. Because of this, the idea of Siberian independence, which has existed for a long time, has been growing stronger in recent years. And here's why that's a huge problem for Putin. Siberia is critical to Russia's power. It holds the world's largest oil and gas reserves, with the western Siberian basin supplying 70% of Russia's oil. It's also home to massive deposits of gold, diamonds, and other valuable minerals. Beyond its economic importance, Siberia is a key military stronghold. It houses major air bases, missile launch sites, including nuclear ones, and vast training grounds for Russia's military forces. Many of Russia's weapons, vehicles, and advanced defense technologies are also produced there. So, what's really at stake? If Russia loses the war against Ukraine, everything could change. The indigenous people of Siberia, already fed up with years of exploitation, might push even harder for independence. With international support, a Siberian independence movement could gain serious momentum, dealing a crushing blow to Russia's central government. If Siberia were to break away, it could spell the end of the Russian Federation as we know it. And the Sibir Battalion? They've become a symbol of this resistance, the fight for freedom from Russian rule. If Ukraine wins, a new future for Siberia could become possible, and that's something Putin fears deeply. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.